There's been a lot of complacency, and I think especially within the ranks of the Labour Party, and especially the Labour Party up here, because let's face it, there aren't enough nationalist voters in Scotland of themselves to deliver an independence vote. So if it is to be yes later on or tomorrow morning, it will happen because tens of thousands of Labour people, and who may still be Labour people after it, will have decided to vote for yes. And the overriding reason for them doing so, that I've been able to glean over the last few months, is a complete and utter alienation, a sense of alienation they've felt within their own party. And this goes back to 1997, because the extent of Tony Blair's majority in 1997 more or less guaranteed 3 terms. Definitely 2, but probably 3.
It was the biggest majority in the Commons that MPs ever had, the first one.
And a lot of Labour people, especially in Scotland, thought, this is great, this is the first time that in modern democratic history that a Labour Party has been given such a massive mandate, which will last over 10 years or so, loads of time to effect the change in society that they had been hoping would come one day.
They did deliver Holyrood Parliament.
Yep.
Because
but if you look at they were talking about the reform of the Lords. There are now more Lords. We're talking about reform of Westminster. We got the expenses scandal. Every other month it was being revealed that big business were bribing MPs to plant questions in the House, so parliamentary democracy was being suborned. And so a lot of people say, well, why didn't you do this? You had this massive mandate and you squandered it. And of course, during this time as well, it began to be revealed bit by bit that Gordon Brown, who was our great hope, the standard bearer of the left against Mandelson and Blair, had actually spent most of his time in office in this self-serving, bizarre turf war, obsessive turf war with Tony Blair, when we thought he was actually running the Chancellorship and the Exchequer, and he wasn't. Well, he may have been, but how many spin doctors he had got in his side to undermine and destroy the careers and reputations of those who were deemed to be Blairites. You're thinking, well, how much time did he have left to actually run the economy? And a lot of us felt betrayed by that.
I think too there's an issue for Scottish Labour voters. We've got into Labour again, but it is crucial, because I think they are, however this referendum is going to go, it will be determined essentially by Labour voters, in my view. The Scottish leadership simply has not matched up to the challenge of leading Scotland. I mean, Donald was, in retrospect, I was going to say a towering figure. He clearly was that, but I mean, an outstanding person. I think Henry had a lot of potential talent, but simply, wasn't there for long enough because of that silly business over expenses. And since then, the best will in the world. I mean, it's not just the individuals, Gray and Joanne Lamont, but the people beneath them. I mean, you've got to look hard for talent, and especially experienced talent that Scottish Labour voters can follow. Who's leading?
There's no big characters. I was having a chat about this last night, because you mentioned Donald Dewar, but people at Sam Galbraith fall into this. The late John Smith as well, and you wonder why these talents haven't been replaced, and you wonder why, especially with the dawn of our own Parliament, you would have thought that this would have sparked some imagination and some enthusiasm for the Labour standard within Holyrood, and it hasn't happened. And I wonder if it's because what had attracted these big brains and these big minds was a Labour Party which you would have expected, in at least part of it, what it possesses was a sense of radicalism, and it was radicalism in the possibility of being able to change people and people's circumstances and change society, which Labour always promised. And I think since 1997, that promise or expectation of radically addressing some of the issues in society disappeared in the New Labour project. I don't think it was deliberate. I think simply they wanted to embrace big business. They wanted to ensure that the Labour Party was electable in Middle England And Middle England is this kind of modern concept as well. People didn't talk about Middle England until the late 1980s. Well,
they could have got away with a lot of this though if they hadn't done Iraq. I mean, that is where the kind of moral credibility, you know, the kind of the very foundation of what you're about was seriously questioned. And I mean, it wasn't just the rest of society. I mean, core Labour people looked at that, and especially afterwards, you know, with the failure to plan for the peace, even if you thought it was right to get rid of the regime of Saddam, which in some ways definitely was. But there, you know, an aftermath has been shocking, and all that stuff about rendition and torture, in which we were, you know, compliant. I mean, that really did kind of destroy, I think, really crumbled a foundation for a lot of Labour people.
yeah, but I mean, it wasn't just the war itself. It was this again we were being drip-fed information about which began to reveal the extent to which we were acquiescent in deeply disturbing, questionable methods by the Americans. And America at this time showed itself to be a deeply uncivilized country in its treatment of prisoners, not even prisoners, suspects. And it would appear that we were acquiescent in that. And I think even people who thought, well, okay, there were some justifications for going into Iraq. This was before we realized about the dodgy dossier. There was this kind of promise that, well, if we do something decisive now, we will settle the region. But a lot of that disappeared when it began to become clear that we had acquiesced in torture, or at least the assumption of torture by the American state, and the deep possibility that it may have happened in British airspace as well.
If it's going to be a yes in a few hours' time, I mean, we begin to worry then, do we? I mean, it's only the beginning of the process if that happens, but it's not just the discussions. It's we have a kind of all of us will have an idea of what kind of Scotland is going to be, and there has been the white paper, but you know, Team Scotland may be led by an Alex Salmond as an SNP person, but it will include Civic Scotland, Kevin. It will have, you know, the Labour people must be represented in as part of the fabric of our community. I mean, the white paper itself, there's no guarantee that that is what we're going to get. There's no guarantee that anybody in London is going to agree to whole sections of what they're asking for. So, you know, it is uncertain. We just have to believe that we're going to come out better.
Well, it's deeply problematic. A year and a half, I'm not entirely sure that the intensity and the complicated nature of these negotiations can be done in a year and a half. We have to assume that some good people in the Labour Party and also in the Conservative Party will be willing to join up. One name that springs to mind, and which I've heard in various people's lips, is Greg McClymont, the MP for Cumbernauld, who is Labour's shadow pensions minister, who's a young up-and-coming MP with a big brain, big ideas, and he's the sort of person you want on any Team Scotland.
It's not going to be Darling, is it? I mean, I think that there's a kind of, you know, difficulty there is the taint of the no campaign, but whenever it's been put to Alistair, I mean, he hasn't found, you know, the words or the tone to say, well, look, when this is over, Alec, you know, you and I will have to stand shoulder to shoulder. He does not sound
I would
like that.
I would like to think that he would be involved, but I wonder if throughout the course of this campaign, which is more or less 2 years, that things just got a little bit nasty or a little bit personal between him and Salmond. Not nasty, but a little bit personal. And it might be unfair of us to think that we should automatically assume that he would take up an invitation. I think if he didn't, we would have to permit him some wriggle room, because he will have taken, if it is to be a defeat for his side, he will have been deemed to have been responsible. He will be subject to criticism both within the No campaign and without. And I think he may just feel too sore or too wounded.
Maybe it's sore about Gordon Brown emerging at the tail end, really, no. I mean, the Gordon Brown was his kind of nemesis in a way, rather than Alex Salmond.
Yeah, well, I think Gordon Brown's involvement was deeply questionable anyway, given that he achieved very little, and as I said, I felt that he betrayed some of the expectations that we all had of him. And yeah, if I was Alistair Darling, I wouldn't be happy about that, because Darling, you know, I've criticised him, but I thought, especially in the first debate, he showed his mettle. You know, he's a politician of the first order. He shares most of Alex Salmond's vision for a fairer society. You can't say that he hasn't fought for this. And in normal circumstances, you'd want him on your team, but I would entirely understand if he felt he wasn't able to. But this year and a half of negotiations, if it is to be a yes vote, will be very thorny. And let's face it, your Team Scotland will be negotiating with representatives of a state which has had 400 or 500 years of diplomatic excellence.
You're going to send a gunboat. That's
Yeah, you know, it will be a formidable team that will confront Team Scotland.
There is also, though, I mean, if there's to be a yes, there is also an immediate, compelling need to get agreement. I mean, the currency will. I mean, as soon as the market's open, there's an issue, Ken. I mean, that doesn't happen immediately, obviously. I mean, because we continue as part of the UK. But I think even then, if there's, I mean, they are going to have to quieten down. Well, the markets to save the currency, protect the currency. That's
my information is that Salmond, when he makes his phone call, again, if it's a yes vote, it's a big if, a phone call will be made as quickly as possible tomorrow, and that negotiations on the currency will begin. Well, Salmond will want them to begin as early as the middle of next week. Yeah, you're right to point out that for a year and a half at least, Scotland will remain part of the UK, so that should calm some immediate fears. But the markets then will want longer term answers, such as, you know, Britain's balance of trade, its deficit. What will that look like if there's no oil? 90% of the oil receipts will disappear overnight in a year and a half. And you can't just keep saying, look, we'll have that sorted in a year and a half. You need to put down a marker, and I think that's probably Alex Salmond's ace.
That's why I think that, you know, this will build a momentum of its own. It will just be an organic thing that will happen. There will be lots of the detail. I don't know. Do we still, you know, do we have the beefeaters, for example, afterwards? I mean, do we access the Tower of London? There'll be millions of ridiculous things that could last for years, but nobody cares because they're not important. But I mean, the big things will have to be sorted quickly. And in Britain's,
it's in Britain's interest.
Their interest globally is to say, we've sorted this. You know, it's okay. The world need not worry about this. The Scots are our friends. There is no border. All of that stuff.
Well, I was speaking to a couple of nationalist advisors last week, and I put it to them that surely one of the things that Salmond would be saying in any negotiations is that, look, Scotland will become overnight one of England's or the rest of the UK's closest allies in almost all areas of foreign affairs. And you know, okay, you can project forward and say, well, what if the rest of the UK get involved in another unpopular war or an illegal war? I don't think that's going to happen because there's still so much pain and fallout from what happened with Iraq. Syria. Yeah, but by and large, Scotland will be happy to be deemed to be one of the rest of the UK's closest allies.